of some Christian ideas and just some things that we can talk about as we kind of jump into this topic today. I hope that you are doing well. God bless you. I hope that things are going well with you. And I want to talk about some of these ideas because I really feel like there doesn't need to be this disdain, this dislike for one another. We actually can be more agreeable. We can agree to disagree, but things can be more agreeable than they are with respect to how we interact with religions and how we look at people and how we see a way forward. Because a lot of people have a lot of animosity for a lot of reasons, right? When it comes to various things that have happened religiously, and a lot of times I see people want to say this about one religion or this about another religion and not really find the common ground, or not really even think about and understand that these things, a lot of the ideas and the concepts that we talk about in religion today, and particularly in Christianity today, were present in ancient Kemet long before there was Christianity, long before there was Christ, long before Christ, came to earth and was on the earth. These ideas were present. And that being the fact, and knowing that, and we're going to talk about some of that today, and some of those ideas and concepts, that being the fact, should mean that there's a bit of commonality there. It should mean for those of us who understand that and know that it's a fact that we don't necessarily have to look down on our brothers and sisters who may think a different way or who may be, doing things and believing in God and believing in Christianity in a different way. We don't necessarily, and it doesn't mean that the reverse, that people who might be Christian would, necessarily just hate and disdain anything that comes from Africa, that comes from the people, long before that. There seems to be this way where there's just this disconnection and we're not open about it. So I want to explore that topic today, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, because obviously I'm not going to have all the answers. You're going to have a lot of things to contribute, but the idea is to find some type of common ground. The idea is to look at it, look at the facts, look at some of the things, and see, at the end of the day, when we talk about Christianity, when we talk about religion, when we talk about God, I believe we should have some truth and some honesty and some love in our hearts. If it comes across in a way that's hateful, if it comes across in a way that's ugly or violent or yelling at people, we obviously are not expressing God. We obviously are not living. And that's one of the reasons why I like a lot of Kemetic philosophy, is that it touches on many things having to do with Ma'at. The whole idea that there needs to be truth and balance, that you made no one to feel fear, that you caused no one pain, you did nothing to hurt someone all the days of your life, or in this particular day that we're dealing with, right? But in a lot of times when it comes to religion and talking about God, people do just the exact opposite. They don't act God-like, and they find themselves rationalization and rationalize why they can be mean to someone else in the name of God. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to have the discussion. It's incumbent upon us to talk about it. And even for those of us who understand that there's a longer history than a lot of times what we talk about, to be able to have that with a cool head, to be able to understand that and not necessarily be mad at somebody else because they believe in a certain way or they're believing in Christianity and believing in a certain way. I think that's wrong. And I get asked the question a lot, why do I say God? We're going to talk about that here. I get asked that question a lot here. And why do I take God and believe in Jesus and things like that? Why is that? How can there be those things coexist at the same time? And I say, how can they not? So we're going to jump into these concepts. Let's talk about them, and let's not feel, one way or another intimidated or mad at somebody because of the way they feel and the way they believe. The most important thing is how do you treat one another? How do you believe in God? How do you develop your soul and your character, and how you get closer to God? I mean, that's what it is. And getting closer to God means helping everybody else in the process. God does many things at one time. God can do more than one thing at one time. So the idea of helping people in the process has to be a part of the religion, in my opinion. If you're really serving God, in my opinion, if you're really doing something to help people, that's what it's all about. And a lot of times we get caught up in names, we get caught up in saying things, we get caught up in what the word is and not the meaning behind the word. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, and I want to talk about this concept today, and I'm going to speak from this document. You guys know I like to write and look at research and to say some things. So I am looking at, and if you want to read this yourself, I want to share with you in case you want to read some and kind of get a background on your own. But I'm looking at the Litany of Ra, and it's basically a series of recitations that were written on various walls of kings and the tombs of kings and near Waset in ancient Kemet and in various places and other Paris and that type of thing. And it was kind of pulled together and talked about in this particular book around Egyptian literature. So you can look at this. It was done by Wilson. He's the person who edited it, and a number of well-known Egyptologists of the time. So I think this book came out probably in 1901. So it's well over 100 years old, obviously. And a lot of well-known researchers and people with respect to were archaeologists and who did a lot of the finding of some of these things that were talked about in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They wrote pieces of this particular book of Egyptian literature. So you can read things about it. And it's very interesting because when you read it, they tell you very straight up, very, very, very straightforwardly early on in Egyptology that a lot of these things are present. They talk about a lot of these things in much the same way as they talk about the Bible. As a matter of fact, when you read about this, a lot of historic biblical societies and organizations at the time studied Kemetic literature. They studied Egyptian literature. They called it Egyptian. They studied Kemetic literature with the hopes of being able to kind of corroborate things and stories that they were talked about in the Bible, because there was such rich literature there, so many documented things, so much evidence. That's why it was talked about so much. And you have people from all different walks of life, Jewish, all different walks of life, were studying Kemetic literature, and a lot of them use a lot of it and saw a lot of similarities. And so this isn't nothing new. It's something that I think within the past maybe 50 years or so, or maybe thereabouts or more, where a lot of that disassociation from the fact that these things came from Africa, that these things were present, before there was Christianity, before, Christ was on earth. And that doesn't take away from Christ. And to me, truth doesn't take away from it. It doesn't take away from Christ at all when you just understand the truth, but people kind of want to ignore that. And I just want to make the point that a lot of your archaeologists way back when, in the early 1900s and late 1800s, were saying these types of things pretty openly, right? They were talking about these concepts. And this is one book that you can read where it gives you a whole list of a whole bunch of various things and various types of Kemetic literature that you can read on your own. And you can look at their interpretations from like well over 100 years ago. So as I say that, and I want to say God bless you. Thank you, Team Z. Thank you guys for joining. God bless you. Thumbs up to you too. I hope that you are doing well. Just want to say just want to say thank you so much. So as we look at this and we jump into this, start to talk about this and to deal with it, because a lot of times I really feel like history and the study of Kemetic literature has to in some way free us. It cannot just be a history that we talk about, that we yell about in time in halls and in various places where we might have meetings and in libraries, wherever it might be, and debate about it and walk away kind of huffed and puffed, and that's it. It has to lift us up. It cannot just be something that's on the wall, because the whole idea of Kemetic literature, Kemetic thought, Kemetic theology was that of resurrection, was that of becoming closer to God, was that of what kind of character are you becoming? If you want to pick a C word and kind of sum it up, it's character. And that character is attached to your soul, is literally kind of goes hand in hand. The character of your soul. We're not talking about the character of your nose or the character of your thumb, the character of your arms, how many muscles you have. It was the character of your soul, who you really are. That's what they were talking about. And if you see, the examples and samples of people, like this gentleman right here who is talking about and wanting to live forever, to be alive forever. What do they mean by that? Where did those concepts come from? And how do they talk about this? So I want to kind of touch on that today and talk about it. And so as I look at this and look at this particular document, as I mentioned, this is by Wilson. You can look at it, and in its Egyptian literature, it was 1901. You can look at it. They start to, and this piece was actually translated by Neville. So if you know Neville, however you pronounce his name, he did a lot of archaeological expeditions in ancient Kemet at the time, in the 1800s and early 1900s, or thereabout, around that by the time. So that was the person who actually translated this particular document, but you can read about it here. So as we jump in and talk about, it talks about this, the worship of Ra. And so this particular piece of literature, and these are pieces of literature that they're pulling from various places where it's been recited and recanted in many different instances, and they're kind of putting it all together in one so that you can read it and see it. It's talking about the worship of Ra. We've talked about the idea of there being a manifestation of God, and that God, bringing everything into being, if you want, there being different aspects of God. And they talk about that a lot in this particular literature, and you can kind of see it. The whole idea of there being one God, one source of creation, and many manifestations of that source. And we talked about yesterday, as we were getting into, when we were talking about the Kemetic idea of what took place before creation, right? What took place. And we talked about that the other day with respect to there being aspects of hiddenness, aspects of formlessness. And these are male and female counterparts. The Ogdoad, if you will, that's referred to at Hermopolis, that the city where Tuti is Lord, if you will, that whole idea there being a male and female counterpart in four pairs, if you will, and there be formlessness, darkness, an abyss of water. All those things were expressed as being there prior to the beginning of the earth, beginning of creation, beginning of the universe, beginning of everything took place. There was already this idea of formlessness and hiddenness already in place. And so that's what I want to touch on, that because that's going to be present in what we talk about. And it's also something that jumps out at you in what we talk about here. In addition to that, the idea of resurrection, the idea of retribution, the idea of paying for doing something wrong, for not being, the way you should be, for not living up to Ma'at, that's also in place before Christianity. It's also in place in ancient Kemet. So as we look at this and we talk about, so I kind of read this part for you and I want to mention to you, and it's saying here would be the priest kind of reciting this. And this would be something that would be written on the walls of a king or on papyrus or in various places, talking about what you do to honor Ra in the afterlife, to pray for that person's soul and that person's connection with God. It's so much that's involved into it that he talked about. And it's, Amish the superpower, supreme power, the master of all the hidden spheres, right? And, the principles that arise who dwells in darkness. So he's saying that you have principles and ideas that have arisen. So you literally have come out of darkness. You literally have come out of formlessness, and you have come forth to bring forth things. And it talks about that you have who dwells in darkness, who is born as the all surrounding universe. That God itself, when God woke up as the universe. Kind of think about that. When God decided to create as the universe, and all things came into being. God existed, brought things into existence as the universe, as everything that you see. And we start to see this concept of there being one source for creation, this concept of things coming out of darkness. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and also there. The earth was without light and form, and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. That whole idea of there being a voidness, there being darkness, and that God woke up and brought forth things into being is there in ancient Kemet. And it's not a bad, you can see how they looked at there being one source of creation, but they looked at the aspects of God, just like you would look at me. You look at a human being and you would say, hey, this is a person. This is one person. And you mean that they have a hand. And you call it a hand. They have a mind. They have eyes. They have legs. They have arms. They have all these different things that perform different functions, and we give them names, but it's still one person. Just like you have a body, and in your body you have organs, right? And now and they even had this back in ancient Kemet, so they had this back here. But now you go to a doctor and you have specialists. Right? That doctor is trained to look at neurology. So they're looking at your neurological system, or somebody is a cardiologist and they're looking at your vascular, and you're looking at your circulation system, various things. Somebody's an endocrinologist, whatever, a pediatrician. You have somebody who's trained on a certain aspect of medicine and a certain aspect of you. Somebody who might be looking at your kidneys, right? Somebody who might be looking at various things that you have going on that may not be the same doctor that you would go to when you have a general problem. This whole idea of there being an importance in specializing in something, and it's all you. And sometimes you can go to doctors, and you can go to different doctors. They all have degrees, and sometimes they may be not talking to each other and not quite be on the same page, and you're the same person, right? So this whole idea of there being specialists, the whole idea of there could be one entity, one person, and there being different functions within that person that you specialize in, and you begin to talk about it and call it out, becomes significant. So that's a concept, and the Kemetic people, let's just say it up front, they had ideas, and they personified these aspects of God. They personified this whole idea of darkness. When we talk about there being darkness and formless, they gave it names, So this whole name, and I'll kind of put up here, this Amen or Amenet, this Nun and Nuat, you'll see that pronounced or not, whole watery abyss. They gave them names. They gave them personifications, and they said male and female. As we talked before, they were not taking away the female part of it. This was a balance, because when you looked around the nation, you saw God manifested in very important ways in both male and female. You couldn't have one without the other. You can't have one without the other. Today, we pretty much need each other. So this whole idea of one canceling out is not what they looked at. Is not what they were doing. It's not what they were talking about. So that you're looking at this whole idea of there being darknesses and formness, and there being an idea and expressions of God and things that they believe existed, characteristics that existed before God decided to create. And when God decided to create, that became consciousness, and they called it Ra, or sometimes they called it Ptah, and they gave it different names to express the same reality, kind of poles of the same thing with different focuses, if you will. Like I'm talking about your heart, like a cardiologist, or I'm talking about your brain, or I'm talking about some aspect of you. They were looking at different aspects of God and giving it name, different aspects of creation. So that is not the same, obviously, as you would seeing in Christianity, but the idea that it came from a creative source and there being one creative being is definitely there. And just simply the idea of looking at the creative being and seeing different aspects of it and seeing different qualities that you personify. And I don't think that was lost, and that wasn't a contradiction from Kemet. And you could read this whole thing, and this is a long thing, so it's going to be really hard for me to read the whole thing. It's a long thing, so I would suggest you read it. But the idea of there being one creator, there being a creator that brings forth and brings all of the things forth is clear, and it's said over and over again. It's said in his Litany of Ra. You can see it in the Shabbat song that we talk about. So there being one source of creation, we kind of conflate it a little bit, and I think sometimes people will talk about it as if, Kemetic people and people, they just generalize. We just call them pagan, we Kemetic people. And we don't like to really say that the Greeks meshed their deities with the Kemetic deities. And a lot of times, some of them, they were copying the Kemetic deities. We don't like to say that. And we like to just say and talk about logos and logic things but we don't talk about that. A lot of these people you read, especially Socrates, you read the Apology written by Plato, and Socrates is talking about doing things for the sake of God. Socrates, Plato's teacher is talking about doing things for the sake of God. We don't give that aspect to Greek people. We don't talk about that when we talk about Roman people. They were all into temples and various aspects of God. They were doing that, right? They were doing it in a different way, right? There's definitely differences, but they were doing that. And we tend to just look at what they built. We tend to look at just, and say they were logical and they were the father of medicine and various things like that. But don't do the same thing when we look at Kemetic thought. We look at that. A lot of times we look at it today, and a lot of from a Christianity perspective, a lot of Christians will look at it and just say it's just evil, it's just heathenistic, and it's devil or it's bad, and not look at the same types of things that's going on, right on the other side of the Mediterranean, and say the same thing. They really just look at them and don't mention these other things about them. And I think it's interesting because it's just a way to kind of just take away everything that a lot of Kemetic people did, that Cushite people did, that Western African people did, Southern African people. You almost begin to disassociate yourself with a whole group of people and just say those whole group of people have nothing to offer from a religious standpoint, but you look at other people who copied them and say they have a lot to offer from a logical standpoint. I mean, like, this is, even though they're still practicing many of them the same types of religion, many of them they're doing the same, going to the same temples, literally refurbishing the temples that the Kemetic people started. They were refurbishing some of them in the Greek and Roman times. So it's very interesting to me that we would just look at them and just kind of poo-poo it. And I get it. I know that people, want to say that God is a jealous God and that you can't have no God before God. I understand that, but I think we're not really speaking to the heart of God. I think we're not really looking at, because we're more concerned about the words than we are the people. We will seriously hurt people and offend people and cuss at people and even kill people if they don't look at God the way we do. If somebody brings this up, some people will literally want to hurt somebody because they don't look at God the same way we do. That to me is the most anti-godly thing. That to me is the one thing that will let you know if a person is truly following peace and following truth or not, is whether or not they're trying to hurt people. Whether or not in them trying to bring peace and bring lovingness and bring an understanding of God to you, if they want to hurt you and make you, convert at the point of a sword. Right. We do that. And that's kind of the way we look at it. And so I think that a lot of us, have that experience. And that's something that we got to push back on. We got to really be able to say, are we truly living in a way that's really reflecting God-like qualities? Or is this just something that people are putting forth for other reasons? So, I mean, we'll talk about it more, and there's more I want to say about that as we kind of go on. But thank you, Hotep. God bless you as well. Thank you so much. I thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I very much appreciate that. So as you look at that, you start to say, so people are arguing from a historic standpoint that a lot of things that came out of Africa are not worthy to be talked about, that they are somehow not connected to God. And what I've seen happen is, in particular, and I'll say it for African Americans, but it's not just African Americans, people all over the diaspora, black and white and black people all over the diaspora will look at aspects of African, even Kemetic religion, and just discard it altogether, and almost act as if there's nothing that the people that they see in their history has to offer, and to call it by names and give it all kinds of names, and then just not take a whole body of knowledge and just throw it away, when a lot of what you're practicing came out of Africa. And there are similarities there. And I know we want to, argue in terms of the way people approach God, but I think that the whole idea of interacting with God has a lot to do with what you do and how you're treating people. And so as we look at that, and when we jump into, let's look at some of the other things that are included in this. So it's saying, as we get kind of into the second verse, this is, giving praise to Ra, right, the supreme power, the beetle that folds his wings. that rest in kind of the afterworld, if you will, in the beyond life, that is born as his own son. Ra, the supreme power that is born as his own son. That's not me. This is a 1901 translation of the Litany of Ra, of what was said about Ra in Kemetic temples and tombs long before, a lot of the things that we're practicing today. It's saying Ra is born as, what it's saying is that Ra is that which gives birth to itself. That nothing gives birth to God. Nothing gives birth to God. God gives birth to all things, and even to his own son. And this idea that it jumps at me, because I know that we want to hate each other. We want to hate, some people want to hate Christianity, but some Christianity people want to hate, Kemetic thought and African religion, but you look at that and you say, wow, look at this. He's saying Ra is giving birth to his own son. I've wondered as I've studied, biblical things. I love the Bible. It's one of the most important books I've read. There's so much I got out of it. And as a child, there's so much I got out of the church. And there's no way that I don't know or don't understand that God was talking to me and working with me as a child and I was growing up in church. There's no way. And I'm never going to deny that. That's God. God can speak to you in any language, anywhere you are. You don't have to have this form, whether you're trying to put an African form around there or you're trying to put a Christian form around. You don't have to have this form where you can't hear from God. But a lot of people believe that. Like, we can't get past, let me figure out what I can learn from this so I can help people. Let me figure out what I can learn from this so I can move people forward. Let me figure out how I can learn with so I can cope, right? There are a lot of people now who can't eat, who don't have food, who are homeless, who don't have an education. There are a lot of people going in schools who can't feed themselves. They don't have money, and people who I said who are homeless on the street, and people who don't have jobs, people who are difficulty finding jobs. A lot of that's going on for people all over the world, and yet we debate about how we're going to help them and whether or not we're going to help them. I mean, I would think that if what we believe is so powerful, it's that powerful, it ought to be able to help anybody, wherever you are, and you ought not to withdraw help because of what somebody believes. If somebody's being dangerous, that's another thing. If somebody's doing something, but you ought not to withdraw help because of what somebody believes. I think that if what you believe is that powerful, we ought to be able to be good and to solve the problems of the world. Because what is it about, right? If we can't help people cope and live a better life, what is this all about? What is history about? What is anything about if you can't help people live a better life and live it more abundantly? So this whole idea of him talking about Ra is that is born as his own son. And when you think about that, I thought a lot about, and as I started reading about this and even more as I got older, the idea of the Trinity, and it always struck me as I thought about the Trinity. And I think of, God in three persons, blessed Trinity. You hear that, recited a lot. I believe like in Catholic churches, you'll see that God in three persons, blessed Trinity, and you have, recitations that will be made. This idea that God is the Father, God is the Son, and God is the Holy Ghost is great. I get that, but I never understood why people could say that and not see that was very similar to what some other people were saying. They just had more numbers. That you would say God is manifested as Ra, God is Ptah, God is Asar. That's what they did. That's literally what they did. They just had more numbers. And we will pray to God, and we will pray in Jesus' name. We'll pray to Jesus. We'll pray in the Holy Spirit's name. We'll pray. That's what they were doing. They were saying God, and right here you say that is born as his own son. And so you hear this, as you start to read it, and this goes on for verses and verses and verses, and you see so many examples of them talking about Asar, and Asar being divine of body and having the same body and substance of God, and having the God as his members and his limbs, if you will, and God bringing forth things, and God being manifested in other deities that will be present in before creation, other deities that were manifesting and filling out functions just like the organs in your body, saying these are all God, literally saying these are God and God are them. That's literally what they're saying. You just don't even take my word for it. Read it for yourself. And I look at that with the concept of Trinity, and I say, how can we not say that they're saying the same thing? They just have a different amount of numbers, and yet we look down our noses at them, right? And we say things about them, right? So another thing that goes as it goes on, it talks about Ra, who produces his own members, produces the own parts of his body. Ra produces the own parts of his body, and who fashions what is in him, who was born within his sphere. So he's saying that he is bringing about those things that are going to be part of him. He's bringing about those aspects of himself. He's the one, nobody's giving birth to him. He's bringing about those things from himself. This whole idea becomes very similar. Consistently they're saying is one deity that's doing it. It's one God that's doing it. And so Ra, the supreme power, who discloses the earth, and lights in the afterworld, if you will, and his principle has become his manifestation. And he's saying, so the whole idea, that which God wants in his heart, just as we talk about from a standpoint of Patah and the Shabbat of song, that which is the principle of God, those things that you stand on, those things that you want, those things are what became the manifestations of God. This is what they're saying. And this is not me, guys. These are Egyptologists from years ago, many, many years ago, who was born under the form of the God with the large disc. That he's born in this form. When we talk about Asar a lot of times, and this will go further on in this. It goes further on and talks a lot about Asar and Asar being made in the likeness of Ra. That Ra, it literally says Ra is Asar and Asar is Ra. When Ra is born, Asar is born. When Asar is born, Ra is born. They are one and the same. And it's very similar as we're talking about the idea of resurrection. We talk about the idea of retribution and having a hellfire and being paid back, if you will, if you were a sinful person. All of those things are present in just this particular literature, but it's present in other Kemetic literature as well. So the whole idea of Asar being that of the same substance of God. I remember reading about and studying about the whole idea of what was taking place with Athanasius and after, Constantine, during the time of Constantine, when they were talking about, what would be the canon for the Bible. And there became a discussion about whether or not Jesus was of the same substance of God or was like a man who was endowed with divinity. And there was decision and discussion that really took place in the Council of Nicaea. And you guys can talk about it. You may know more about it than I do. That whole idea was a real argument. And that was not expected to be. That was a real argument. And obviously they came out with the idea, obviously, that Jesus was of the same substance as God. When you talk about that and you have that discussion, and there's more into that, because maybe we'll go into that. Maybe we'll talk about the Council of Nicaea one day and kind of compare and contrast what they learned and what they said versus what we see in Kemetic texts. But that whole idea was a big deal. But that whole idea of a divine being born and being of the same substance as the Creator is present in ancient Kemetic thought. Is present right here, just like I'm showing born as his own son. It's present in Kemetic thought. It's there. We shouldn't be hating. As Christians, we should not hate. Christians should not hate people who think Afrocentric ways. I don't think there should be hate there. And I think that that challenges a lot of people. I think that makes a lot of people scared on both sides. I think it challenges the power structure, right? In a lot of ways, but really you ought to look at what's true in your heart. What does it mean in your heart? Because if that person over there who's telling you something is not the person to make you feel good when things are going bad, you don't need to make that person's life and their opinion be resolute in the main thing that you do with your life. You just don't need to do it. You literally need to kind of even if that person is a priest or your pastor, if that person is not there to make things better in your life, you shouldn't put their opinion right in front and center of what you're doing. You shouldn't do it. I don't believe. I think there are a lot of people who put somebody between them and God. They put somebody between them and how they will interpret history and things that could help them, right? God can speak direct. I believe it. It didn't have to happen just 1,000 years ago or thousands of years ago. It can happen. You can have your own revelations. God can speak directly to you right now. You don't have to wait for somebody to tell you that this is to pray on it. I believe God is that strong to give you the real revelation, to give you and me the same revelation, one that does not conflict and one that helps everybody out, one that doesn't resonate in violence. And so as I think about that, I think about so many examples I have of people. I know people who've said that they had a parent who was being abused by their other parent, and that their parent was told, their mom was told not to divorce her husband because divorce was bad in God's eyes. This person went to a pastor to get counseling, and the pastor told him to basically pray for him, even though he had a drinking problem, pray for him. And even though he was beating her, not to call the police and to basically pray for him and don't leave him, because by leaving him, you will be committing a greater sin than what he's doing to you. It's basically the advice she was given by her pastor. And the man got violent, increasingly violent, and was threatening the child and everything. The child that was still, all this kind of stuff was happening. And we a lot of times will allow somebody to get between us and God. We will allow somebody to interpret common sense things. And all I'm saying to you is you look at these things that are much older than what they tell you, much older than the Bible. You see these things present. It's because the concepts are true. And we should embrace them. So we shouldn't hate somebody or hate Jesus or hate somebody because they're following Jesus or hate somebody because they saw this that was written thousands of years ago or hate somebody because it's manifested in a different way. They resonate with people. They're around for so long because the concepts are true, because they resonate with you, because they mean something. So he's also talking about here And Ra, the supreme power, the soul that speaks, that rests upon her high place, that creates the hidden intellects which are developed in her. It talks about not just there being an aspect of God that's male. It talks about there being a female aspect of God, just like we were talking about the other day in terms of the Ogdoad and there being pairs, if you will. That whole aspect was not, you did not have the divine feminine divorced from creation, away from there being the significant right there at the beginning. So whether you're talking about Shu and Tefnut or Nut and Geb, or you're talking about either Ogdoad, you see the divine feminine male there at all times. We just happen to interpret it in a different way. So when you start to look at this, they're talking about not just resurrection. So you have them talking about the concept of God being born and Ra, who's born as his own son. We just read that, right? And this the whole idea and this concept of there being resurrection. The resurrection is present. And we've talked about the Asarian Tale. We've talked about here on this channel. You can maybe look at it and I can link to it. But we talked about that and the whole idea that Asar was somebody who was captured by his brother and tricked and killed and cut up into different pieces. And there's a lot to the story that means a lot about your life. It's really talking about you and your way to kind of reclaim divinity and get back to God in your life. But the idea that Asar was killed and chopped up and then brought back to life by Aset and helped to recreate and bring about Haru, that whole idea of coming back to life, that whole idea of rejuvenation, that whole idea of resurrection is present in Kemet. It's present in Asar and it's present in many ways. And you will read so many ancient Kemetic texts. And I think this is one of the reasons why we don't read it. I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of people push away from it or discourage people from reading, because when you read it, you can't help but see similarities. You can't help but see overlap. You said, this man wrote this 3,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. It's no way that they were writing this to offset what we're doing in Christianity. They were writing it because that's what they believe. They were writing it because that's what they wrote. I think this is why people don't talk about it. I think this is why they push, because when you start to read it, it becomes powerful. And to me, all I care about is the truth. All I care about is you and me and us being able to live a more abundant life, a life that allows us to get the most out of what we want, to stop living our lives, like I mentioned with that woman or various people who are just giving up your life and giving up your happiness for what, right? For what? For what? Living less than what you should live, being less fulfilled. I mean, the whole idea of Kemetic theology was resting upon the idea that when you do these things, you experience peace. Jesus said, I came that you may have life and that you may have it more abundantly. That idea of abundance, of peace, whether you want to call it nirvana, whether you want to call it some Zen like that, like people have different names. That whole idea is that you should be living it. You should be vibing in it. You should be able to live your whole life in a spirit of peace based on what you perceive and how you interact with people. And one of the first things you do is you don't do bad things to people. You don't do bad things and bad things won't come back to you. And then you'll be able to handle it when you have challenges in life, because they're really there to help you become closer to God. You'll be able to handle it better. You'll be able to deal with difficult things better when, one, you're not doing the wrong things, and two, you're connected with your divinity. That's what it's all about. Like if it doesn't give you that, if it doesn't give you peace, if it doesn't give you love, if it doesn't give you happiness, why do it? Why do it? And why have history? Why read history and be unhappy? A lot of people will read these things and they'll be angry and they'll be angry against, religion. And why read history and be unhappy? Understand that your God and your concept and your answers are more powerful than that, or more powerful than you give them credit for. We can work through this. And so as I think about that whole concept is there. That whole concept of resurrection is there. It's present. It's present in Kemetic documents. It's present in the Asarian Tale. It's present in the Perneb, the Book of the Dead, if you will. It's present in the pyramid text. It's present in the coffin text. It's present in tombs. It's present in literature. It's present. And it's there. And the interesting part about it is that resurrection, that coming back to life, that divinity, that connection with God, that peace is not reserved just for the kings. It's not reserved just for queens. It's not reserved just for one or two people and they're the only two people who can get it. It's everybody. You have access to it. This is your birthright. This is what you have. You have access. The fact that you were born, if you were born and you're alive, I always say you were already chosen. If you made it through all the obstacles that it takes to bring human life to come into existence, you were already chosen. You have access to this. Nobody has to stand in between you for that. No person, no priest, no spouse, no idea, no race, no none of this. That you literally have access, and it's freeing when you look at that. And that concept of there being an Asar, you hear them read about it, and when they talk about Asar a lot in these Kemetic documents, they will refer to the person as Asar. You will see them talk about Asar in a very glorious way. So if you read through this Egyptian literature, literature thing that I mentioned, the Litany of Ra, you will see them talk about Asar as being the same as God, as I mentioned, is when Asar was born, Ra was born. God was born. When God was born, Asar was born. That they are one and the same. They share the same members. Just like you talked about, that Ra is what's bring forth his own members, the whole parts of his body, that Asar's members is that of Ra, that Asar's body parts, if you will, are one and the same with God. That whole thing is there. And then when you see all of this glorification, all of these wonderful things that they talk about in terms of Asar, you would turn around and see them talk about a person, like this person right here, and call them an Asar. They will equate people who are scribes, who were priests, obviously, priestesses, queens, kings, other people who were noble people, other people, you will see them, call them an Asar. Your divinity was not limited to just one person or two people or just kings and queens. It was available to everybody. It was there because the whole idea is that you are connected with God, that you have the ability to manifest God, and that you have the ability to live in peace. And so that resurrection, that renewing, the fact that you never die, the fact that you can be connected with your family members forever, you can all do that. Many, many people in ancient Kemet, many people had temples in their honor after their death. I mean, you had to be able to afford it, right? But they had many, many people, common people. Not everybody was, the general. Not everybody was the king who had a tomb and had people remembering them. Like you see right here, this is a tomb where this man would have been remembered, this man and his wife would have been remembered. And these false doors would have represented an idea of that person being able to come back from the afterworld, if you will, into the living, and to be able to be amongst his people, and to take any form they want, and to live a life of peace, and all the things that you would want to have in life, you have access to. You see this kind of depicted. All the things being provided for. That was talked about for everybody. Anybody could talk about that. That whole concept of theology, the whole concept of resurrection, the whole concept of redemption and renewal is there in ancient Kemet. And you see that there in the surrounding other places as well. So as we talk about not only that, one thing that struck me as I was reading this, it also talked a lot about retribution. It talked a lot about Ra, slaying a pep, and talked about, let Asar not be the person who's caught by the enemies of God. Let him not be caught by like the evil ones who will take people and burn them up and put them in their fire and burn them up, take the bad people. So, and you would hear that a lot talked about in terms of Ani and various other people. When you read their literature, their papyruses or their tomb literature, you'll find them talk about, let them not be accused of doing anything wrong. Let their soul and their heart be able to match whatever. Let them not be accused and found guilty of doing something bad, where they will be attacked by the evil spirits, if you will, who punish people who are wrong. Let them not be caught and put in the fire. I mean, literally, as I was reading this, talks about that, and as they were talking about Asar, because it talks about Asar a lot in the Litany of Ra, it talks about Asar a lot, and it's saying, let Asar not be caught. Let Asar not be put in the fire by the evil ones who catch people who are doing evil things, right? That whole idea of there being a hell or a place where you get paid back, you get retribution, you get punishment for living a bad life and for doing wrong, that's also in Kemet. That's in ancient Kemet. That's there. It's present in his literature, it's present in the tombs. You see it in the various places. That's there. You find that concept there in ancient Kemet quite a bit. And it's not just one or two places. You find that in a lot of places. So as we start to think about resurrection and retribution and hellfire and various things, these concepts are present in ancient Kemetic literature and in ancient Kemetic theology. They're already there and they resonate, right? And they resonate for a reason. And so as I think about that, we start to think about Christianity, and we start to think about, the antithesis there, or the animosity that might be there, from people who might be Christian and somebody who might be thinking of African thought and African religion and African ways of doing things, that there's an animosity. And to me, that doesn't have to be. There's so much there that's shared. And at the end of the day, the idea is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to use your thoughts and your connection with God? Are you going to use this information to make you help life better for other people? Are you going to use it to help other people? Or are you going to use it to help yourself? To live at peace, to help yourself be happy. Because at the end of the day, we can talk a lot about finance and material things. That's good. But if you're not happy, it doesn't matter. Are we going to use this to be fulfilled? And are we going to use it to make other people's lives better? I think that's very important. And there's a way that we can kind of get together and find a common ground. I believe it doesn't always have to be something that's the antithesis, and the animosity doesn't always have to be there. So I'm going to talk about some more. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to look at some of the things that are in the comments. I'd love to hear what you say and what you think about this. I wanted to share that. I will come back to you soon with more. God bless you. And I thank you so much for sharing. Talk to you soon.